Welcome. This is a Kingdom Justice Conversation. My name is Freddy Washington, and I'm the worship leader here at GCC.
And I'm Mallory Dreyer, and I am on the Leadership Council, and I am a house church leader.
And today, we're having a conversation about kingdom justice because we believe that kingdom justice is so important to God. God is a God who is so deeply concerned about justice, and it's actually one of our core values here at GCC.
And with this conversation, we would like for you to maybe jot down some notes. We encourage you to just come up with any questions you might have, and then maybe after join up with your house church leaders, and just have a time to process, to pray, and see where you fit in all of this.
We really believe that God is on the side of the oppressed. God is on the side of the marginalized. God is on the side of the broken, the outcast. And really in this conversation, this aspect of kingdom justice that we want to focus on today is actually civic activism. And so we're going to talk with Gabriel here, who's going to really just elevate our understanding of this aspect of justice.
Amen.
Gabriel, thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure, man. It's a privilege. I always love being with you guys. Yeah. I want to go ahead and start this conversation off by asking you guys as leaders what you think civic activism is. Because, of course, I believe that change happens from the top down.
Yeah, yeah.
As well as from the bottom up.
Absolutely.
But for you guys, I'm curious, what do you guys think civic activism is, and why does it matter to you? So,
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think that, and I'm sure that you'll certainly elevate our understanding for sure. Yeah. But I think that before this conversation, before we even spoke, my understanding of that would have been just using whatever influence we have, using our voice, using giftings, whatever we have available to us, resources, to kind of push against the brokenness in society, marginalization, things that have kind of oppressed specific people groups, maybe that we're a part of or not a part of. So if you asked me that a week ago, that would have been my understanding.
Right. That's on point. What about you?
For me, I think that, even I was thinking about this and what we're doing here even today, just coming together and having a conversation because we care about the community and we care about the entire community. And this is something that we want to see change. We want to see perspectives shifted, and we want to see, and when you think civic activism, the first thing that comes to mind is protesting, but there's so much more than that. And it can even be in just these conversations that's being filmed so that we can encourage others to move forward and to make a change, or to even just become aware that change is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of your answers are so powerful, and I really appreciate you guys both sharing that, especially as it concerns the need and the urgency to be active. I'm reminded of what Jesus said, because everything we do, of course, is grounded in what the Word of God says and the example of Christ. But I'm reminded of how even Jesus, when it came to the community he lived in, looked, and at one point he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. To my knowledge, he said it 2 different occasions. But the main one was when he was in a situation that dealt with racial inequity. He was in the town, a Samaritan town, and there was a lot of historical beef between people who were Jewish and people who were Samaritans. And Jesus went straight into the town to talk to not just a Samaritan, but a person within Samaria that was on a lower level, a Samaritan woman who had been divorced several times. And a revival broke out just by them starting a conversation, but even his own people didn't recognize when they showed up what was going on. And he had to tell them, guys, do you not see what is happening around you?
Absolutely.
That by me sitting down in the hot sun, because he went out in the middle of the day.
That's right.
And just from a historical note, real quick, he could have turned that water, it wasn't that he had to sit down with that woman to ask her for a drink. He already turned water to wine.
Absolutely.
So you could have made water if he wanted to, but he chose to do something that was difficult to make a connection. And when he went out to make the connection,
I love that.
his own disciples didn't even realize that they were supposed to be a part of that process.
Yeah.
Guys, do you not see that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few? They're white.
Yeah.
The fields are white and ready to be reaped.
Yeah.
I think about that in regards to activism as well.
Sure.
And how so much is going on around us in our communities that we don't see because we're not taking time to recognize the situations that we're in and connecting that with what we had in our last conversation on anti-blackness. That happened around a tumultuous 2020 should be a movie.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
It's gonna be a movie. Oh my goodness. Woo. But it was a tumultuous year. So many deaths from Ahmaud Arbery, gunned for jogging, lynched for jogging, to Elijah McClain, a young, at least 17-year-old, murdered by police. And of course, Atalia Jefferson, which happened previous year, but then Breonna Taylor. So many people were fired up.
Yeah.
Some people went to marches.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, they went to the protest. But they stopped.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with many people that say, I just feel overwhelmed and I just don't want to feel bad. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Sure. And this is why we have to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because you can never be effective doing work in civic activism if you don't know what you're called to do.
Yeah.
With knowing what we talked about scripturally, you can say that you are against racism. You can say you're against racial bigotry, but you still have to know what your skill set is so you can be effective. There is nothing, all your power is going to be based on the anointing and gifting you have.
Sure.
When I look at scripture, I see the apostles that still had different giftings even when they followed Jesus.
Yeah.
Simon the Zealot, even after Christ rose, was still from a zealot background.
Yeah.
He had those connections.
Yeah. Yeah.
With resistance movements.
Yeah.
Matthew the tax collector still knew finance,
Yeah.
even though he followed Jesus.
Yeah.
Peter was a fisherman, The list goes on, but they were still distinct in their abilities and their giftings.
Absolutely.
Look in the early church. You see examples of people like Barnabas the Levite, Acts chapter 4, and he went out and used his resources as someone who was trained as a Levitical priest, and who was rich. He sold his belongings and used it for the church.
Sure.
You got Acts chapter 10 or chapter 9, Tabitha.
Yeah.
She was so significant that when she died, the church asked the apostle Peter to raise her from the dead. And when you look at her gifting, what was she doing? All she did was make blankets for the poor.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, you're dealing in this context, in this culture, with people who were Jewish in the Roman Empire. They were still part of an oppressed minority group.
Yeah.
But within that group, people still knew that everyone had a different role, and all she could do was make blankets. You go from her, you check out people that wrote the book of Acts, like Luke, the historian, who was also called an evangelist.
Yeah.
I relate to him a lot because I tell people I'm an evangelist who happens to be a pretty good historian. But I tell stories, I reference history, I reference the receipts in order to show people who others are in different groups.
Sure.
The work of the scribe.
Yeah.
You see this throughout the Word of God with how people had different giftings.
Yeah.
And they knew how to be effective in their communities and how to be activists where they were. We talked about it last time. Stephen the Levite. Stephen in the book of Acts chapter 6.
Yeah.
He came from a background as a Jewish person where he was a Hellenistic Jew. He lived in Gentile territory. And there were disputes even amongst the Jewish people between the Jews who were of Rome and the Jews who came from the Gentile territory. The Gentile Jewish people were put lower.
Yeah.
But God used Stephen in his anointing as a deacon and as a historian to set it off for the early church.
Yeah.
So all these different roles are already present, but we look past that and don't realize this is about a multifaceted church that's coming together with different giftings. So again, bottom line, we have to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Because so many people, when the protests were happening, the largest, Black Lives Matter apparently was the largest protest in history.
Yeah.
And even when people that may have disagreed with certain aspects, people around the world were active.
Sure.
But they had a mindset that this was a moment.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to actually do movement.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And we want to encourage people today to know what is your role so you can be effective making movement where you are.
Yeah.
So with that being said, Do y'all have any quick thoughts?
Well, yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you because that was so profound, but I think that one thing that really jumps out to me is just all those examples that you named. If you take a look at that, it's ordinary people.
Ordinary.
They've got everyday giftings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nothing particularly miraculous about many of them. Maybe there are a few examples that are okay. Wow, that's really something. But it's really ordinary people taking the little that they have, and I mean that little bit helps move things forward. I think that in our minds we kind of stop short because we feel like we have to be the tidal wave.
Yeah, the heroes.
No, if our little bit will contribute to the larger change that will happen, and it may not happen immediately, but over time, things can change if we just bring our little bit to the table. And I think that just all of those examples, if we have those examples, and that's why these conversations are critical, because having those examples available to us, it does remind us your little bit that you have, your gifting is welcome in civic activism. It's actually needed and actually is possibly given to you for precisely that.
Exactly what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
It's real. It's real.
And I think, too, something that I've really been kind of meditating on is, and Chris said it on Sunday, which I thought was so cool because it was already something that I was thinking about, is like, we are commanded to love God and love people. And all over the word is God talking about how he loves justice. Like, if you do a word study on justice, it is like the only thing that he said, like he straight up says that he loves. So, so it's like, what I've really been asking God is like, okay, how can I partner with you, love people, and to love justice like you? Like, what is it that you've put inside of me? We all have different gifts. We all have different ways of even different ways how we express love to people. So how can we use those things that he has already put inside of us to partner with him in justice and partner with him for kingdom? Like, that's really what it is partnering for kingdom.
And that takes knowing, it really is true. Just like you won't go into a driver's test without studying. Or, try to get a degree without doing work. Everyone, if they're concerned for the kingdom of God and justice, they have to do proper study. This is what I meant earlier by moment mindsets versus movement mindset. There were lots of people that were proud to be at the protest. There were lots of people that were there, and I've gone to several prior to that for years. So, of course, working with activists who work with Dr. King, I saw many people saying, we talked about this, they love quoting a handful of Dr. King's quotes. Hate, only love, hate can't drive out hate.
Only love can do that. Darkness can't drive out darkness, only light can.
But they never really studied movement. So once the protest was done, they weren't really helping out with people on the ground because they didn't have humility enough to sit down and study themselves and study what does it mean to be involved from the people that are doing this work. And this is why we have to understand social systems are nuanced. Social systems are truly nuanced. Everyone has a lane, everyone has a part to play, and that's the nature of how this thing goes. When you think about civic activism, we're going to talk about the civil rights era, by the way. Last time we talked about Civil War history. We talked about the history of anti-blackness, through the Americas, I'm sorry. And how there were interracial alliances that happened. We're going to talk about this from the perspective of what happened in the freedom struggle of the 1950s and 60s, and how it wasn't just one thing happening. Movements connected together. They linked up together. When people were dealing with injustice, racial injustice, for example, it wasn't just fighting for the right to vote. There were people that were fighting for the right to have access to clean water. There were people that were fighting for the right to have fair housing. There are people that were fighting in the school systems, as it concerns the ability to share their history accurately. And if they didn't link up together and know their different roles, they wouldn't have been effective. Social systems are nuanced, just like an ecosystem that has different creatures in different biomes, and they all have cohesion. It's the same thing with civic activism. There are different There are different skill sets, there are different organisms that God has made for us to interact.
Yeah.
And there's room for you to fit.
Yeah.
So instead of, for many of us who have expressed being overwhelmed, instead of being overwhelmed, take some time to study the history. We talked about MLK. Sure. Many people may not be familiar with him, but even when they are familiar with him, they're familiar with the I Have a Dream speech. What they're not as familiar with are what he said in his speeches. I would encourage everyone out there to go and check out. You can go on a YouTube search and sit down for 10 minutes.
Look up his speeches.
You know, the drum major speech, that's a freebie. Give another freebie. Letters from Birmingham jail, read it. Find out what these people did, and you'll find out that most of the time they never referenced themselves.
Yeah.
They didn't believe in having a singular hero. They believed in movement.
Yeah.
And once he and others were murdered, assassinated, powers that be came in and tried to make it all about them because they knew, well, it's like when people in the Bible, they kill the prophets, make them into martyrs, so they could say, oh, we were down with them too. They did the same thing to Dr. King and many others. Yeah. But he was hated in his time, but it wasn't just for what he said. It was because he actually celebrated everyday people to build movement.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I want to give y'all some examples. Have y'all ever heard of this lady right here, Georgia Gilmore?
Oh, yeah, actually. Yeah.
I've heard her name.
The cook who funded the Civil Rights Movement. I was blown away seeing her story.
Yeah.
Years ago. Because again, most people think about civil rights activism, they think about it's about going to protest.
Right.
Yeah.
But let's be real, what happens after you go to a protest or you go to a community meeting? You're what? Tired or hungry?
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
Where are you going to eat?
Yeah.
Who is feeding you?
Yeah.
These things were not small when it came to movement building. And this is why her example is so prominent. When Dr. King and others held meetings for the Montgomery Improvement Association in Alabama, it's what happened. In Gilmore, she was there, and she was selling fried chicken, fish sandwiches, and using the money that she raised selling food. Yeah. As she said, I used those white dollars to fund the movement, and they never realized that they were paying me to fund the work that we were doing with activism. I was blown away that Dr. King celebrated her work. And let me be clear, when it comes to celebrating everyday people, this is a problem even with not majority culture, but even within cultures that are predominantly black. I've seen that where people will celebrate the pastor, the bishop, the guest speaker, but they'll walk right past the person who works at McDonald's. Yeah. I look at the person working at McDonald's saying, we're recruiting you for the movement. I need your voice. I need your skills. I need your hands. Yeah. There are people like Georgia Gilmore who funded this movement and kept it going. So let me ask you out there, maybe you're saying to yourself, maybe many are saying to themselves, well, all I can do is cook food. Right. I don't feel I can do something. I look at them and say, oh, good, you're hired. We're going to recruit you for civic activism. Because there are activists who are doing critical work to build communities, and they have so much on their plate, and you, using your gift of hospitality, to strengthen them with something as simple as food. That's right. God, it just burns my mind, how many people shut themselves down and tell themselves, well, I don't feel I can do anything because they have this limited, narrow view
of what it looks like.
Sure. Give you another example. Let's go to the next one. Jonathan Daniels, the minister who laid his life down for the community. Y'all heard of him before?
I'm actually not as familiar with Jonathan.
No, me either.
I wanted to mention this real quick before we go further because it's really important for people to understand. I've heard this said several times throughout the church and other churches for years. Well, I feel that activism, civic activism, is something that's predominantly for black communities. And I want to bust that myth up right now because there were hundreds of white people involved.
That's very true.
Partnering with African Americans and any number of varieties in black culture, variety cultural groups. The myth that was promoted to shut down the work was that it was just a one-sided conversation. So for many of you, you didn't grow up in your school system. They didn't grow up in school systems seeing the examples of white people that were martyrs in the civil rights movement. That were celebrated again by Dr. King. Right. Quote from Dr. King, one of the most heroic Christian deeds of which I have heard in my entire ministry was performed by Jonathan Daniels. Jonathan Daniels was actually martyred, protecting African American kids. He was at a shop at one point, and there was a white supremacist who came inside the shop. Same situation that happened to Ahmaud Arbery was about to happen to these kids.
Right.
So this man who was a priest and a minister, jumped in front.
Hero.
Right. Shot down with a shotgun. Died.
Yeah.
But prior to that, he was simply living life in his community, ministering to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ministry is not just preaching from a pulpit. It's you sitting down with people and opening your ears.
Yeah.
For people out there who have said, well, I don't feel I can do much with activism. I hadn't gone to a lot of protests. I look at you and I say, well, you could sit down at the table with people and ask them how their day was. You could actually invite people to your house if you have one, young college student or young adult. You do have that within your power. And yes, there are people, if you're white, who are like you who did that. And that was movement.
Yeah.
This is what Jonathan Daniels did. And he laid down his life for the people that were going through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let me be clear, by the way, in what I'm saying. I'm making it clear because no one in this room, if you're out there listening, is going to say, well, I don't know what I can do. Y'all going to learn, and you're going to get recruited into the movement. Because this is how movement building goes at activism.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to give y'all one more example, actually. Or actually, we're going to get two more.
Anna Braden.
Ann Braden, the woman who bought homes for African Americans.
Yeah.
Y'all heard about her before?
Yes.
Ann Braden's my
actually
girl.
have
Oh my goodness. She has a book. There's a book out there called Southern Patriot. Or it's a documentary called Southern Patriot. Check that documentary out for anyone out there who wants to learn more.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that when I say check out these documentaries, I want to make sure that everyone understands this is part of you doing your homework. If you really want to know how to do movement, this is why we take time to study. So as I mentioned before, read Letters from Birmingham Jail by Dr. King, and then study this person that he referenced, because Ann Braden was one of the people that he referenced as an example of a white American that truly helped out the movement. Many people skip past that because they don't read. This quote that says, if it was Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King who convinced me to join the struggle, it was Ann Braden who showed me how to do it. Bob Zoner, he was one of the student nonviolent coordinated committee members. He was a white man, actually came from a background with the KKK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Resisted them, and he learned from Dr. King, but also other white women that Dr. King highlighted. And by the way, Ann Braden, she did work for a long time when she was young, but she also continued to do work when she was older, when people would not allow black and brown people to own homes. The very fact that she opened her home up was an act of resistance. Yeah. So while a protest was happening for the right to vote, people knew that when they got home, they would have to deal with being blacklisted. This is a very real reality for being black in America when it comes to what we call microaggressions. Certain things that we say online, certain things that we do, we know companies can look at that. People who we go to church with may not like what's being said, and they may go and tell others who have power in positions of authority, and it will hinder me. That's a very real fear. That happened in this time frame. And Braden, as a true ally, jumped in and said, you guys should not be fearful of whether you'll get a home.
That's right.
So while she had the privilege of buying a house, she didn't just keep it there. She used her home. She bought homes and then opened the doors for others to live in them.
Yeah. I mean, think of how critical that is.
Extremely.
Think of the freedom that gives people who know that there would be reprisal against, them actually standing up for what they know to be true. But, their voices being silenced for fear that they're going to lose what they have, that they'll have nowhere to live. That's essential to the movement. That's essential.
And I mean, it's powerful. I mean, if you want to put it into a modern context, if I was someone out there in the audience saying, well, I don't feel like I can go to protest, and I just feel like I don't have much to say. My question is, do you own a house? Do you rent a house?
Sure.
They say yes? Okay, cool. So you can use your home to host community meetings. There are multiple organizations working with troubled teens and youth, working with getting fair housing in DC, working with addressing the problems in Chocolate City when it comes to discrimination. There are plenty of people that would love to have meeting spaces, so you already have an option if you wanted to be involved. There's room for you in this movement. And Ann Braden was an example of that. King admired Ann Braden's work with the newspaper that she made to document the history. she made a newspaper, Southern Patriot, to document the struggles that were happening when it came to national civil rights, including, showcasing the material that Dr. King and other, activists did.
Yeah.
And he referenced her specifically, if I can remember what it says. He referenced her as one of the women that was truly eloquent and prophetic as well when it came to expressing what was going on.
Yeah.
Another point, if you say, I don't know what I can do, my question is, are you good at speaking? You say, yeah, I'm good, I have a blog, I like to write online. I'm looking at you and say, okay, I'm looking at you now saying that you're eloquent, you can speak, so you can use your voice to raise awareness on things.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
You have a gifting, are you using it?
Sure.
And there's so many others we can go through, we only have so much time. Let me give this last example, actually. Maria Varela, Latina organizer who photographed the Black experience during the Civil Rights era. She's one of my favorite examples. And the reason why is because, we live in a social, my phone is always with me, guys. I love to document. It's called movement journalism. And I love to go into spaces and document what's going on.
Yeah.
That's why so much happened last year, because somebody took a phone and documented it.
That's true.
For Black Americans, the phone became one of our greatest weapons to film our experiences.
That's true.
With officers, when we recited our rights under the law and when they were violated. The phone became powerful when we documented movements so that people wouldn't be able to say, well, you guys just complaining and doing nothing. No, sir.
Yeah.
We had a prayer rally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We had a town hall committee. We documented these things. And this is what she did. She was one of the people that documented the experiences of freedom riders, of civil activists. She documented what life was like for ordinary Black Americans, because so much of the media of her day was not showing what actually happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's powerful also for her example, as mentioned before, civil rights activism is not just a Black freedom struggle dynamic. Sure. It's intersectional, as we say. There were people from different backgrounds. Dr. King, in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, one of the books he wrote near the end of his life, noted how there were different ethnic groups that came from different boats, or different ships, but now we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
He mentioned what happened with people who came from the Latino background, from the Hispanic background, like Cesar Chavez, fighting on behalf of farmers who were being exploited, just like today, when it comes to food slavery. They were not being paid fair wages. It's human trafficking. And Cesar Chavez was fighting against it. Dr. King referenced him, and he referenced people like Maria Varela as well, who were documenting, because he wanted to show that we have to connect our movements together. Yeah. By the way, I know I got to ask you, please drop it down, because that's one of the reasons I love whenever we can talk, and you talk about your experience, being, me being Afro-Latino, and you also from Black American culture. Please share what your experience has been like seeing that play out with the activism. Like, do you know about her before?
Yeah, I have heard of her, and it made me really proud. So in terms of just activism, or just
when people have you ever had people assume for you, well, there weren't many people from your background involved in civil rights? Have you ever had that happen to you?
I mean, where I grew up, I was one of a handful of people of color.
Oh, wow.
So growing up was pretty isolating,
Right.
And I had majority culture all around me,
Right.
which a lot of people honestly don't expect. When they hear that, they're like, really, you experienced a lot of racism? Yeah, actually, my whole life. So yeah, and I definitely have experienced a lot of,
Where do you grow up, by the way?
I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So middle of the woods.
Right.
Middle of nowhere.
And just for those who don't know, your background, you mind explaining your ethnic background?
Yes, my dad's side of the family is all from Puerto Rico. And my mom's side of the family, my grandma immigrated here from Honduras. Actually, I'll have to tell you guys the whole story later, but she was actually labor trafficked here. So, which I just found out over Christmas. She shared her story with me.
Wow.
So yeah, talking about labor trafficking, that is actually a part of my family's story, our legacy. So,
Wow.
which is why I'm so proud of, how far every generation has come. Like my grandma's so proud and excited that she has had the opportunity to even watch that, evolve,
Wow.
and because of how she came here.
Wow. That's powerful. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I would bet money that people have, from what you've said, have walked by and never realized the full extent of your story.
Well, they think a lot of the times I'm married to a white man, and we are middle class, and people look at us and we do look, put together, successful. So just to hear that, like, even when everything kind of exploded in this last year, like I was dealing with a lot of my own healing and a lot of things that I hadn't faced. And there were a lot of stories in my background that I hadn't even told Stephen, because it was just too painful.
Sure, yeah.
And I didn't really want to relive it. Yeah. But in having to process with a lot of people, which I realized became my role. And I was happy to do it. Yeah. But I did also need others to help me process as well, because I hadn't really dealt with a lot of the pain from the racism that I had experienced in my past. And we talked about this too. Yeah. It still happens. Like just because I live in an area of Virginia that is diverse and, we live close to DC, we live close to a city, people think, oh, well, that was just like, because you lived in the middle of nowhere and you lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. And I'm sure you don't experience any of that now, but I told you guys, even at the beginning of this month, Stephen saw it himself. We went in a store and we were looking at different things. So the people that worked there didn't know we were together. And I was carrying a big shopping bag, and this girl followed me around in the store, and I caught her looking in my bag. Wow. And, maybe that had nothing to do with race. Nothing was actually said directly, but it definitely felt pointed, that I was being looked at for shoplifting. Sure. And then the other associate, she had just helped Stephen with something, and I went and asked the same question a little bit later for something else, and she wouldn't help me. Yeah. And Stephen was livid, but I told him, like, this is stuff that you're noticing now because you've become more aware in this last year. Sure. But this is something that I've dealt with my whole life.
Yeah. These last 4 years, it felt like people were given permission,
Oh.
top down,
Mm-hmm.
to do things, And it's, I've been to several spaces, to your point, where people have been shocked by the things that have been going on. But family members have to let them know this has been happening.
Oh, yeah.
You just weren't able to see. It's not that you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
It's just that
you just weren't aware.
Right, you weren't aware,
Because it wasn't affecting you directly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
the courage it took for you to experience that, but to still show up, and then to still help people be aware, and then call to action. That's why I think about Maria Varela, coming from a Latino background, and choosing to document, choosing to raise awareness because of the work she did previously. Yeah. In photography, and using her simple gift of pictures to capture the moment, to transform moments in history. It's powerful to see how people did what they did despite the stuff that was going on in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I really hope you guys catch that out there, because sometimes we can look at people in moments of history and just assume, well, they're just a strong person. It's not that they're a strong person. Yeah. They're courageous and they're willing to do things despite what they're going through.
Absolutely.
For me,
we definitely don't feel strong all the time either.
I was shocked over the last year how much stuff came at me just for saying this is what it's like to be black in America. Yeah. True story, I have been pulled over, just for driving the speed limit. True story, I have been profiled in shops just for having locks. Sure. Mm-hmm. True story, I was celebrated by people. I have to tell people, true story, I was celebrated at one point as eloquent, but the moment I spoke about an experience that they didn't want to hear about, then I became in quotation marks, a dangerous black male that could not be trusted. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And those things were said in church. So I'm just calling it out because there are many people who have gone that same situation. Absolutely. Many people, many black and brown people who have gone through that, and they're still showing up with their gifts.
Yeah.
And they're looking at others who are white saying, you come from a background that also had people who showed up too.
Yeah.
So instead of just saying, oh, you're just so strong, I admire your courage, show up and listen and hear and take time to study, because you may not see it since you're not really aware of it because it hasn't hit you. But when you become aware, what are you going to do?
Yeah, because then knowing that history does give you a context
Right.
for even how your gifting can be useful today. In this context.
In 2021.
Yeah.
And you know the times.
Yeah, absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. And I honestly, like, to even shift us into a more current kind of a perspective, some people I think maybe misunderstand like civic activism and just activism in general, like doing something about it and just having diversity, So they say, okay, well, we've got diversity, so that's our activism.
Right.
So can you just kind of speak to that a little bit and kind of, focus our attention on what we should be thinking about?
Cool. Well, let's get some modern examples. I think diversity, as you mentioned, diversity is not enough.
Yeah.
It's a start, it's part of the
Yeah.
foundation, but diversity doesn't go anywhere unless you know specific roles that you can play with the activism. So we're going to go through a couple different roles.
Yeah.
One role that you have is a healer. You come in and you gather people together to bring healing where they are.
Yeah.
Some of you may have that kind of gifting. Call it a gift of hospitality, well, a gift of encouragement. We read Romans 12. It talks about the gift of cheerfulness. I'm not mistaken. If anyone's gift is cheerfulness, let them do so with abundance. When you have people that are tired because they're raising their voices, they're speaking truth to power, they're calling out systems of injustice, it is so powerful being with people that have humor. Proverbs talks about that. Proverbs says very specifically, a cheerful heart was good like a medicine, but a crushed spirit who can bear.
Yeah.
So some of you, if you have gifts of healing, it can also be, and there's also a gift of healing, by the way, as far as, gifts of healing in the plural sense. But if you have a gift of healing in the sense of encouragement, you can use that to encourage people who are doing works of justice. Practically, schedule time weekly or monthly to cheer on people that are doing work. If you see people that are constantly raising awareness, don't just cheer them on in silence, go heal. They may want to have a time of connection. Lots of people who are white have said, well, I just don't know what I can do. I want to be involved, but they would never open their homes up. They would never actually invite people just to sit down and fellowship and laugh. But that is something that is a manifestation of healing. So whether you're single or married, if you feel that you're good at that, then I'm calling you out to do something. You can use your gift. Another gift, frontline responders. Frontline responders, essentially they jump in on the front lines where things are happening at protests and gatherings, and they're there to get awareness, to get the lay of the land. Yeah. So practically, when it comes to civic activism, we need people that will show up to actually record movements so that we can have an informed perspective. I mentioned movement journalism, which is something that I was trained in. And one of the things I noticed when people would critique these protests, they're just a bunch of violent people. All last summer, it was people claiming it's just a bunch of violent people. Yeah. I paid attention to the people that had their phones up, that recorded how peaceful movements were until others infiltrated them. They recorded people that were destroying property who did not live in the communities. Yeah. And they also interviewed people locally to find out what the community was like beforehand. Yeah. Another term for this is called informed observer. Informed observer, I believe?
Informed observer, yeah.
Thank you. They're literally people that when protests happen, they're there to document what happens. In the event that people get harassed or attacked and taken to jail illegally, they write the names down of others so that they can go and pay their bail, because that happens. Yeah. You may be that kind of person where all you have is free time, or you want to see for yourself, and you're called to be a frontline responder, to go and show up. Sure. And it's not just with civic activism with racial issues. It could be on the human trafficking front.
Yeah, that's right.
It could be on the situations with, I'm thinking, do I really want to go there? I'm going to go there. So many people were offended by Colin Kaepernick, but they supported the Capitol coup, or the Capitol riots. Yeah. And I heard people saying, what has Colin Kaepernick done? All he's doing is teaching people to kneel and disrespect.
Sure.
I tell people, have you checked out his Know Your Rights campaign? Because that's part of what this is.
Yeah.
It was a youth camp that trained African-American youth on knowing their rights when police officers who are corrupt try to harass them.
Yeah.
And they literally did documentation and trained young adults to document their experiences. Frontline responders went into communities to ask what was going on and to minister to people. So you may have that calling. Use your gift to go there. Next one real quick is we're going to go into experimenters. They're there to create and find new strategies. That's something that people are called to do as well. You have people that are called to go in and find out different ways of gathering. They don't do it by themselves. One of the biggest problems that happens in activism, civic activism, particularly if you're white, is that you can go in thinking you're an expert. And so you go in with ideas of what you want to do, but you never stop to actually sit with people doing the work longer than you. As an experimenter, you join forces with others that are trying to find creative ways of connecting with communities or finding ways to build up movements.
Yeah.
So as a learner, when you sit down as an experimenter, you're sitting down with people that have creative giftings, gifts of encouragement.
Yeah.
Another one is a storyteller. Storytellers, you tell the stories of the movement. You tell the narrative. There are people who are gifted in the gifts of speech, of leadership, but storytelling is a manifestation of that. You may be good at talking. I have the gift of gab. The gift of gab, as we say. And I love to communicate, but as a historian, I love to see the story of movements. And so I use that gift to tell stories. You may have that same dynamic going on. You're called to be a storyteller. That matters. And the last one we're going to, I think we have maybe 3 more, disruptors. Whew. Some people are anointed by God to ask the question. That's not a small thing, because some people feel, well, I don't really have much to say. But boy, when they open their mouth to speak, they shut the conversation down so that people can get their facts together. So there are some people that may be called to disrupt. They're called to quite literally not let the status quo continue. They're called to quite literally go in and to shake things up, to confront. I would put that in regards to people that are at the rallies on the front lines that are making demonstrations. I went to one of my dudes, Mark Oasis, and we were on the front lines in D.C. He said, I said, man, where you at? He's like, hey, I'm at this rally. And I'm like, he called me on the phone. I was in Annapolis. I'm like, I'm gonna be there in 30 minutes. And I have to go there and say it like this, because I had people back in Georgia and other spaces saying, we weren't told what was happening on the front lines when people were protesting in front of the White House regarding George Floyd and so many others. We were told it was violence. We were marching, walking on the front lines, locked arm to arm. They had people at the rallies that were praying. I will never forget everyone doing a die-in. We had our hands on the ground to symbolize solidarity with what George Floyd went through. It was a 10-minute die-in. And someone in the back crowd started crying out to Jesus saying, Lord, please hear our cry for justice. Please heal our land and address the evils, address the white supremacy. No one else on the news who demonized the protests talked about it. But the disruptors who recorded stuff, the disruptors who were there to shake it up, they knew. So you may be that person that's called to shake it up, to be the person that raises the question. Drop it like it's hot, as we say. You may be that person that's called to do that. Drop it and break it down. Don't be fearful. You also got people that are builders, too. Builders. Builders build people up. Builders come together to build the people that are already doing the work and strengthen them. Think about it in terms of leadership. Leaders need to speak to leaders. I need people in my life that will say, you're weak in this area. I got you. Let's train. Let's get this thing going. Pastors and leaders, evangelists, teachers, we need that too. We have people that will build our spirit up and say, no, you can do this. I'm with you. Are you sharp? Are you weak here? Okay, let's sharpen your arms. Let's stay in the fight. You need that Adrian for Rocky. That's what builders are doing in this movement with civic activism. You may be that person that's called to build someone who feels weak in their spirit.
That's good.
And the last one, I believe, is caregivers. Actually, 2 more we're going to go through. Caregivers. Caregivers are people that give care. Caregivers are people that literally give care. You may be a person, for the females out there, I've seen so many people say, I just feel like I just have a sensitive spirit and I just feel overwhelmed. But they love hugs. They love having house gatherings where they're sitting down with people baking cookies and pumpkin pie. And I'm like, well, you have a gifting too. Drop some food at someone's house. Drop a letter of encouragement to say, hey, we're thinking of you. Know that we're praying and standing with you. Those things build people's spirits. Biblically, Paul did that when he wrote letters at the end and the beginning of every single letter. Yeah. He let folks know he was praying for them. Yeah. He was thinking of them, and he mentioned people by name. Yeah. Ephesians 6, Romans 1, he said, I remember you. Ephesians 6, he gave shout-outs to people who were his partners in ministry. Philippians 4, he referenced people by name because he was showing care. Yeah. You may have that ability if you like to write letters and do things of showing acts of love and service. Use your gift as an activist to support people. Guides, another one. Guides. I'm going to end on this so that, because we only have so much time. Guides. Guides just help people navigate the movement. Yeah. Sometimes you have people that don't know what's going on, so you need the guides who not only know the lay of the land, but they can take you on a tour of things and just help you to understand what the dynamics are. Yeah. Like taking you through a tour of a museum. A guide will help you to do that. Yeah. Some people may be called by God to do research to help people understand these issues bit by bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Y'all got any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, that's great. I mean, I think that, again, for me, the big theme that I see really even throughout the conversation is that we all have a part to play. I mean, and when we know the history and we kind of look at our context and our giftings and what we have to offer through the lens of what historically has been accomplished even before us, that we're kind of standing on the shoulders of people who used the little that they had to accomplish great things that, you know, we look back in time and say, well, they were superhuman, but they had the same fears that we have. They had the same limitations that we have, but they just gave God what they had. Yeah. And, you know, whether they were a caregiver or a guide. Right. You know, but they did what they could do. Right. And God is the only one that takes little and makes much out of it. Yeah. And so for me, when I hear you breaking these things down, I'm saying, well, I'm certain that people are watching this right now saying, that's me. Yeah. Or that part that Gabriel's talking about. Now that I can do that. Yeah. You know, and I think that I would encourage you guys, you know, at whatever time you're watching this, just look at all of those examples and see which one of those is you. Maybe you've got a couple of those giftings, but let's identify those things and allow God to really lead us in identifying what part we can all play, you know, to advance the kingdom. Because yes, this is kingdom justice work. I mean, you got to know your will. We know that the fullness, you know, won't come until Jesus returns. Yeah. But there's got to be fruit in the here and now. Here and now. And all of us can play a part to see His kingdom come. Yeah.
And what's encouraging is that you don't have to be an expert. We're not saying you have to be an expert now or ever, really. Right. You don't have to, you know, quit your job and join an NGO, or, you know, we're not saying any of that, but that everybody starts somewhere, and everyone does have a role to play, you know, and just in loving each other, loving our neighbor, moving toward, you know, we want to have real diversity in our community, not a false diversity. We want to have, you know, where people can bring their full selves, and we can celebrate each other for who we really are. And so that takes everybody. And, you know, when you and it's encouraging to hear that we don't have to start big. Like, we can start small, and even the first steps can be like, you know, what do I have? Who am I? Where are my weaknesses? Where are my strengths? So that I can figure out how I fit in all of this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and it's likely not going to be a highlight reel. You know, you'll make mistakes. You'll say the wrong thing. You'll do the wrong thing.
It's training.
It's training.
It's training. Every gift requires you to be trained to use it.
But if it's valuable, it's worth it.
Right.
And
The point is to try, and the point is to move. Always try to move forward, even if you. I mean, you know, in the Grace the documentary about Buddy, you know, he moved forward in reaching out to Muslims, and they didn't do it well at first, and they got black eyes, and you know what? That's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you live and you learn, but the point is you try to move forward. You try to move toward your neighbor.
Right.
You know.
And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, because there are organizations that are already doing work on the ground, and this conversation with civic activism, one of my friends, Natasha Morrison, has talked about this when it comes to not trying to reinvent the wheel, but partnering with those who are already doing stuff. She is the leader of an organization called Be the Bridge Ministries. Are we doing something with that, by the way?
Yes, that
Mallory's
is
gonna.
I was going to announce it at the end.
For sure. No,
you got that.
No, come on, let's go.
Oh, do you want me to announce it now?
Drop it.
Okay. Well, I was gonna do it at the end, but that's okay.
No, this is perfect timing.
We are going to put together Be the Bridge groups, and there will be more information on our GCC Justice page. If you're interested, it'll be groups, smaller groups, to talk more about diversity and racial reconciliation and what that looks like. And we really want to build just safe spaces for people to move toward each other and to have these hard conversations in a place where people can be vulnerable about where maybe they fit in all of this, or if they don't feel like they fit in this, like, it's a group that you can come together and say, like, but I care. So even if I don't feel like I fit, like, what do you guys think? Or how can we work together? How do you think that I can move forward? So they will be coming out soon, and just keep an eye out on social media and our Justice page. Yeah.
And all that goes back to Romans 12, because we all have different gifts, use them according to the grace of God that's given us. We want to use our gifts to be activists, and it's not cool.
Hey, thanks so much for talking with us again, and it's just been so substantive, but I really believe that it's going to resonate in the way that the Lord intended, just in the way that He's led you to organize all this information. I really think that God is going to really use it to move some people to action. You know,
courageous action.
we need to pray. We need to pray, but prayer can't be a substitute for action. We're praying that the Lord will lead us into what He would have us to do. He's going to use us to do. Look, He'll do miraculous things along the way as well. But He's going to use us to do things too. So, thanks so much, Gabriel. This has been absolutely amazing. Mallory, thank you so much for joining me here to talk with Gabriel. I mean, we're so happy to have you here with us. This has been a Kingdom Justice conversation. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining.